All right, some practical applications. And this is just kind of some basic understanding of how to use ladybird deeds. So typically you have a husband and wife, and they want to set up a ladybird deed, and let's assume they want to put their children in there. They can do it, as I said, either tenants in common, or they could do a joint tenants with right of survivorship. It really just depends on what their goals are. It's a typical scenario. Or if you have a single person, they do the same thing. They can name whoever the beneficiaries are, either tenants in common or joint tenants with right of survivorship. And by the way, and I know you all know who you are, stop writing deeds that say tenants in common with right of survivorship. I won't mention who you are, but if I see one more of them, fortunately, some of you probably know this, maybe all of you, but there's a fun title note on it that says, if that's how it's written, it's a joint tenancy with right of survivorship. You know, thank goodness there's something that we can rely on. But I don't know who goes through law school and doesn't realize it's one or the other. But I don't know how many of those deeds any of you have seen, but I've seen quite a few recently. Now, in the last few years, I've seen something very interesting. I've seen these larger families where somebody has 6 children, and they love the idea of a ladybird deed. And I don't love the idea of putting 6 children as remaindermen. And I'll tell you why. For one thing, it's a law of large numbers. Somebody is going to get a judgment against them. Somebody's going to have a federal tax lien. Somebody, when you go to sell the property, is going to say, that's our family farm. I will never sign a deed to that. And now you have a big problem. Yeah, you could have several problems. So when I see these large families, what I do from a planning point of view is I talk to the parents, and I choose the child who I call them the pick of the litter. And this is the child that you would trust. I mean, you would hand them a $100 bill and know you'll get it back. And I have that child, we set up a revocable living trust for that child. We make him the trustee or her the trustee. And this way, a couple of things happen. Number one, we can write the trust the way we want. So we can get a little fancy and we can make distributions that are not necessarily, equal if that's what the parents want, or we can make equal distributions. We can decide who the alternatives takers will be. But more importantly, when the life tenant dies, the property is in the revocable trust because the trustee is the beneficiary. And then the trustee can sell the property, doesn't have to run around to all the beneficiaries and ask for their permission, and distribute the assets out of the trust according to the terms of the trust. If there's a judgment against one of the beneficiaries of the trust, it's not like they're a remainderment on the deed that it stops everything. And in fact, it's even better because the trustee could distribute the assets to the other beneficiaries and then negotiate with that creditor and try to get a better deal for one of those siblings. So I'm finding that that's a very good way to plan when you're dealing with larger families, and you don't want to just keep naming people in ladybird deeds. When we talk about this idea of will substitutes, you could write a ladybird deed, and you could say in the deed, to my son, John Jones, and I'm on the wrong page. There we go. Okay. Let's see. I think we have to go back. Go back one. Yep, I think I'm not sure how they have it, but at any rate, it's just a little reversed, I think. You could write a ladybird deed, and you could say to my son, to John Jones, if he survives, if not, to Mary Smith. From the 4 corners of that deed, you can see exactly who's going to take. So it's pretty easy to look at that, and if you record a death certificate, you know who the taker's going to be. But I wouldn't write a ladybird deed and put to my son John Jones per stirpes or per capita, because now you're writing a will, and it's going to be subject to interpretation, so you're going to have probate, and using substitutes that just will not work because, first of all, ladybird deed is not executed with the formalities of a will.